know that they have support. You're not out here alone. You're not out here by yourself. You have a lot of support.
The school district has concocted a half-baked solution involving the purchase of thousands of fans.
This is the actual fan.
There is a plan to get schools and young people back. It does not consist of a $20 fan from Home Depot.
That is unacceptable. That's deplorable, and it gets me outraged.
You know, that's not going to help, especially in the wintertime. Cold air blowing in, kids getting sick. We want our kids to be able to come back to school and learn in safe conditions. I stand with the teachers all the way. I mean, if it's not safe, they shouldn't have to return back to a classroom that they feel unsafe with.
I support the teachers. They're the ultimate front line. They're the ones who educate our children. They need to have a reopening plan that respects science, it's based in reality.
Families deserve a plan that is transparent, that they know that they can trust. The communication with families and about how this is going to play out has been very hasty and not well planned out.
Not without a plan? No!
I've been an activist longer than I've been an elected official. This is the first time in a long time I've seen elected officials gather around one issue. What we realize is that our fight towards health and safety in our school building has existed for years. And with the COVID pandemic, we need a solid plan.
We need people to continue to support the governor's budget, which proposes $1 billion of additional money for the capital improvements that need to be made.
I know personally how hard it's been to work in this virtual environment. So I know we're all looking forward to the day where we can go back into our classrooms. But today is not that day.
We absolutely do want to be in the building with our children. Until the air balancing report says otherwise, we should not go back into the building.
We need to invest in a school reopening that builds trust, that sees our teachers and educators as partners, that puts our state legislators and our city officials and our federal government on the line to get the resources there.
This is how you build back better. This is how you make us stronger. We're not fighting against one another. We're embracing one another to win on this pandemic.
It's a standing together in solidarity. Elected officials, teachers, community, standing together to say, until our buildings are safe, we will not go in.
Solidarity forever. A plan is not a plan. Only when it's safe.